Hello, welcome to the Astrology and Spirituality Show with Elisa and Patrick for week commencing the 17th of May. I have to say, it's an absolutely action-packed astrological week in terms of big developments, but first let's check in with Elisa on her news with the Hermetic Wheel.
So we'll pop that Hermetic Wheel on the screen. So until Thursday, the 20th, we are still in that Seven of Pentacles energy. The Seven of Pentacles is about planting our dreams, goals and ambitions. We are going to have to show some patience before they come to fruition, but that can be the fun part, can't it? Or the planning and the preparation. On Thursday, it moves into a more difficult card, which is the Eight of Swords, which will carry us into the following week. But briefly, the Eight of Swords is about us feeling trapped in a prison of our own making. So this is to do with those negative thoughts that are keeping us locked in some way. So that is a more tricky card to deal with. They will be tricky sort of 10 days when that card is there potentially. But there is always a way out with the Eight of Swords. It's just that we can't always see it.
Right, that's interesting. Well, in terms of the astrology, the big news, of course, is the Sun is going to power its way on Thursday into the lovely Gemini, the third zodiac sign, ruled by Mercury, which is now in its shadow period, preparing to go into retrograde at the end of next week. So that means communications will need care this week, particularly as Mercury is squaring with the dreamy energies of Neptune. If we're buying or selling anything or looking at documentation, absolutely vital to have a real sense of clarity, because Neptune can erode that in some way. However, in terms of the finances of this week, there is still room for progress with Venus forging a very stable link with Saturn. Now, we tend to think of Saturn as being the bad guy of the zodiac. I know from doing personal readings, Saturn often brings rewards, but obviously after a great deal of application. So if we can put together our creative talents, our ability to relate to people well and effectively in a solid way, then something good can come to us. The Sun's also trining with Pluto this week, and that's very much to do with evolution, which was one of the keywords that someone wrote in about. So from an astrological viewpoint, how do you see evolution?
Evolution, from an astrological viewpoint for me, would be us working through perhaps some of those aspects that we have in our chart that perhaps are not easy. So for example, if we have something that is, in an opposition that is causing us some strife in our life, then okay, we know that's there, we know we've got to work through it, but actually putting those things in place rather than just sort of giving in to the fact that that's part of our chart.
So what you're almost saying is like mastering the more difficult aspects that virtually everybody has. And I should say, even if it's someone who has loads of trines and sextiles and grand trines and all the rest of it in their natal chart, it's a known fact that sometimes people who have very agreeable charts, inverted commas, don't always end up being a great success, because maybe they don't find the spark of drive. So more difficult aspects can be really a push to evolve. So I think you've nailed that, Elisa. I think we all have things in our charts which can come up from time to time that we just think, ouch, yes, that's that old, very deep-rooted part of my nature that I thought I'd mastered, but there it is, it's coming back again. So I think that's a wonderful thing. In the here and now, I think Pluto gives us an opportunity to evolve our physical situation, and especially in the sign of Capricorn, because it can be very business-like, very much to do with material things, or it can be to do with an internal change that's going on inside ourselves. So with the Sun at the start of this week in the Earth sign of Taurus, something about our foundations could be evolving. We may be viewing the issue of security, for example, which I think the Earth's signs of Taurus and Capricorn, where the Sun and Pluto are, is very much to do with that. Maybe we're thinking about our relationship to security in a different way, or we have a chance to evolve. Now on Wednesday there is a lunation in Leo, which is a quarter moon, and that could see us tempted to splash out, be a bit more speculative. We may even want to spoil somebody close to us. But I always feel with the Leo Taurus quarter moon, it can be when someone has become a little bit dependent on our goodwill and generosity. And sometimes we might have to push back and remind them that, for example, I'm not saying this is true of me because my son's a very good manager for his resources, but for some people it could be if her offspring has really become used to the bank of mum and dad. Good time to sort of remind them that their expenditure is their business. Then on Thursday, the sun moves into Gemini. That's going to see a speeding up of events. And then on Sunday, Saturn, the planet of structure, which was in that very helpful angle to Venus earlier in the week, does go into a retrograde in the sign it co-rules of Aquarius. And that's going to go on through to the 10th of October. I think we've seen, and I did predict this at the start of the year, a lot of social unrest. So where people feel that they're held down in unfair ways, it doesn't matter if it's to do with sexuality, gender, race, poverty, to do with segregation in terms of religion. You know, we've got a big dispute that's boiled over in obviously Israel-Palestine at the moment. A lot of very long-standing simmering unhappiness. And then in Europe, we've got football fans demonstrating very strongly because they don't like the power that certain owners have developed and how the game has become too focused on money and generation of revenue streams rather than the actual spectacle itself. So all of that potential for revolution rather than evolution, I think, is ramped up with Saturn in retrograde, particularly as it will be continuing to square with Uranus, the other co-ruler of Aquarius, through to July. And then again, the two are going to be in conflict the last 5 weeks of this year. So I think we can still see a lot of people pushing back about what they feel is unfair, but we can also see very authoritarian power, whether it's in Myanmar, Russia, China, pushing back, keeping people down in a way which is not very pleasant at all. So I think that Saturn, for most of us in our lives, is just reminding us that there is a new way of being that's developing. It's going to become much more obvious with Pluto entering Aquarius in 23 briefly, and then in 24 all the time for some years. And this new order, if you like, is not necessarily going to be without its complications. So, for example, yes, we may have more technology, more artificial intelligence, we may have more time on our hands, but how do we still find satisfaction as human beings? So there is a big change going on, and I don't think any of us really knows exactly where it's going, but some of the things in terms of medical and scientific breakthroughs might be very good and positive, like finding better and better testing for cancer, for example. Or we could have, like, as I've mentioned recently, driverless lorries, which personally I'm totally against, because we're just going to deforest the working population, and that is not good for the human soul. We need to do something productive with our days. So I think Saturn going into retrograde could throw up some of the new way things are developing, but not necessarily the upside of it. I can only be honest. And of course, most of all, Saturn retrograde will play out if it's impacting on any personal points in your natal horoscope. Speaking of which, if you've never had your natal horoscope done, please see the link beneath this video and you can get your free birth chart wheel. And also remember, you can also get your free daily horoscope by clicking the link beneath this video. Get it fired to your mobile phone or your desktop every single morning, free of charge. Please see the link below. Now, Elisa, what modality are you going for this week?
Today we're using the Soul Path Oracle cards. And this card is going to represent the week ahead for us.
I used to love these when we did the Daily Show.
Yeah, they have... some of them are more tricky than others.
Do you mean tricky for your good self, or?
I think for all of us, I think the messages on some of these cards are quite they can be uplifting, they can be a bit more challenging. We'll see what comes.
I must also say that I have a challenge today. I've had a shaving accident, and despite the fact that we tried to stem it with some coconut oil, because we haven't got any Vaseline in the house, and Elisa slapped some makeup on me, it's still not worked, I think. So I'm just going to deal with the wound again. Oh my God, I'm so hopeless, honestly. So pardon you if you're someone of a tender disposition. I am very sorry.
It's like
We're sharing blood sports with you.
Patrick Arundell, the horror movie.
Cinema near you now. Have you noticed with cinemas in the old days when I was a kid, you go to the Saturday morning cinema and you come out at like 12 o'clock and you'd been really wrapped up in whatever it was, and then you come out into bright sunlight and it was like, ooh. But the other thing you'd get was like, now get the latest Ford car from your dealer. And it'd be Fred Jones of Chippenham Street, Swindon. And
I think they still have adverts. I went to the cinema once with my brother and we sat there, and it was some of his mates and somebody else, and we sat there, and then it was the big like IMAX one as well, so it was like a huge cinema. And next thing I know, I hear my voice, and I'm thinking, what?
Yeah.
And I'd done this advert.
Me about. Notice how this is slipped. They said, I just heard my voice.
But it was really freaky. It was the worst. It was really weird, and I just couldn't.
Yeah, because neither of us like the sound of our own voices.
No, so when it's in an IMAX theatre...
You know, when we're playing back videos to put the titles on, all the rest of it, it's like, oh, God, not him again.
Yeah.
So, the card of the week is...
this orange one is kind of drawing my eye.
So, we go for the orange.
We're going for the orange.
Perlendine.
Well, it is a bit challenging, I must say. The words on this card are neediness and relationship.
Okay.
And we see this guy here, and he's got like a chain wrapped around his ankle, and the woman's walking away from him, and he's kind of holding the chain.
Look, we can do this saucy sex. It's all right. Don't leave me. It's fine.
So this card is kind of saying, you know, the guy is obviously in a toxic relationship, but he can't let go of it. He doesn't want to let go of it. Even though this person is saying to him, look, this isn't working, he's like, no. And this could represent a neediness in any type of relationship. You know, we could have friendships that we know are not necessarily good for us. Are we giving more than we ever get back?
Or jobs we stick with. We feel chained to them.
Because we feel like we can't move away from it because we're that used to it. It's become habitual.
So this is where the sun trining up with Pluto can be really good this week. If myself or yourself want to challenge something that we want to evolve through.
Yeah, so there's a difference between, you know, wanting to make things work, but in this card, clearly one of the parties doesn't. And the neediness to want to force something to work when it isn't is something that I think the majority of us have probably experienced at some point in our lives.
Yeah.
Whether it's through work or relationships.
Or had it the other way around, when you're the walker awayer and the other person doesn't want to let go.
Yeah, and that can be very difficult because then they're sort of, you feel responsible for their happiness, which is just not healthy. So it's just something to think about for this week. What relationships have that type of neediness in them for us?
Now, we briefly touched on the word evolutionary that someone wrote in, but there was another keyword that has been asked for this week, which is...
Anima wrote in. She's also written a question, so thank you so much. But the word for the week that you suggested was zeitgeist. And we thought this was an absolutely brilliant word, didn't we?
Yeah.
Zeitgeist is really the spirit of the time that we are in at any given time. So
so do share what you think the spirit of this time is.
Yeah,
It's not just what we think,
No.
it's what you think as well. I mean, what came up for me straight away was social media, because everyone has the opportunity. Of course, many people don't seize it, not for a bad reason, because they're preoccupied with other things that might actually be more important. But a lot of people have an opinion these days. So for me, the zeitgeist is everyone has a platform that they never used to have as an individual. Whether anyone's actually listening is another matter. It depends on the amount of followers you have,
I suppose back in the day you'd have to take your soapbox to the local park and stand on it to have an opinion. Now you can just sort of sit on the soapbox of the sofa and have an opinion.
So where would you, because you were thinking it might be reflected in art.
It can, yeah, so this can also be like art, architecture. I think, for example, I was not born in the 60s, but when I think of the 60s, I think of the Beatles.
And the Rolling Stones.
And I think of mods, and I think of mopeds. They're the type of things.
I think of rockers.
You think of rockers. So
Greasers.
That's what comes to my head, even though I didn't experience that decade. When I
Carnaby
think about
Street.
it. Yeah. So the...
Da, 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 da. Oh, it's groovy London. Da, 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 da.
When I think of the 90s, I mean, obviously I was alive then. So I think for me personally, at my age, when I was in the 90s, I think of the Spice Girls. I think of sort of Brit pop like Oasis and all that kind of movement for me is very 90s. Crop tops and trainers and tracksuits.
Yeah, and designer drugs.
And designer drugs. So now, for me, I think when I'm looking back, I will think of this time very much as the time of, like you said, social media. For me, in an art context, I will also think of Banksy.
Yeah, a British artist called Banksy that no one supposed to know.
Yeah, the anonymous artist.
I mean, my favourite Banksy is that we have a supermarket chain in the UK called Tesco. And I know that they tried to expand into America and it was a miserable failure. And they were quite big in Thailand, quite big in Hungary, I think. And I don't particularly like Tesco, if I'm honest, because I feel that all these out-of-town superstores have really had a very negative effect on local communities. And I think when they started, they're going to work 7 days a week. And, oh, don't worry if you work on a Sunday, we'll pay you double time. This will be enshrined. It won't get eroded. And, of course, it's all got eroded. It's all a race to the bottom. I don't believe in mass-produced food in general. And fake brands that they have to make things sound like they're very sort of down home and natural. And, of course, they're not. And he came up with a wonderful one where it was a little boy and a little girl as well, I think, and on a flagpole was a Tesco carrier bag, and they were saluting. So
yeah, we'll put the image in there if we can.
So this was kind of making a point about how people had sort of developed some kind of affection for Tesco and how that was their almost spiritual reference point. And I just thought that was just absolutely brilliant. He totally nailed.
So he's really making a commentary on the time, which is what this word is about, really. It's what makes us think of the era, the spirit of the era that we are in.
And I think the other one that comes up for me within the social media is fake news. So no one checks anything now. We know that some of the social media channels that this video may be shared on, so we've got to be a bit careful what we say. Don't necessarily fact check things, and then they'd say, well, everyone's entitled to an opinion anyway. And I actually think this has led to a huge erosion in standards, particularly of people in public life, because the whole principle of decency and honesty and truthfulness has really just become absolutely secondary to power. And that's what we all have to be aware. It's okay having opinions, but they should be backed up somehow by fact. Otherwise, it's just ranting for the sake of it. But of course, it does affect people's outlooks a lot. A lot of people buy into fake stuff that's promoted. And of course, some of our leaders can be the biggest manipulators of the truth going,
but
inverted commas.
I guess in a positive sense as well, there is more awareness to things. There was a guy who wrote a song called Chocolate Rain, and it came out, I think, in about 2004. And when it came out, it was kind of like one of the first videos on YouTube. Everyone kind of thought it was funny and a bit weird. And I rewatched that video recently, and actually it is a song about systemic racism, which was completely lost on me in 2004. And I don't think that was just to do with my age at the time. I think it was also to do with the world was not quite ready in some respects to have some of the deeper conversations that we are having now. So in some ways, social media has been a great thing to highlight these atrocities.
No, you're absolutely right. Because say, for example, you were a celebrity 30 years ago and one of the British tabloids were tapping your mobile phone and listening to your recorded messages and then sharing news about your private life in their papers without your permission, the only way that you could fight back against those papers was through those papers. So people like the publicist Max Clifford, who became disgraced, had so much power, it was unbelievable. Red Tops had huge power, particularly in the UK. Whereas now, if a celebrity thinks that a newspaper is saying something about them that's not true, they can release their own version of the facts. And that actually is a very positive thing. And I think it's like everything, TV, air flights, consumerism, all of them can be good to a degree, but not too much of any of them. So that old saying of everything in moderation.
Yeah.
But no, I think you're right. It's when people abuse these platforms or abuse power to sway public opinion.
Yeah. So, brilliant word. Thank you so much, Anima, for suggesting that word.
Thank you, and I hope that wasn't too profound for anyone watching. So this week's birthday winner is Lily T. Now, Lisa's briefed me not to say the person's second name because of maintaining their confidentiality, and because last week I did and she had to cut it on the video. So Lily lives in Cape Town, or was born in Cape Town on the 17th of May 1953. So I'm going to just explore Lily's chart shortly, but if you would like your birthday analysed, it has to be for next week commencing the 24th of May, because we want to keep it topical. And Lily shared this about 3 weeks ago, actually, so I had to dig back through a few videos to find it, because in fact nobody else shared their birthday details for this week. So Lily, let's have a look at your nativity as ever. I haven't had any chance to prepare for this really. First thing that comes out for me really is that you have the ascendant in Aquarius, even though your sun is in Taurus, and your sun in Taurus is in the 4th house. So that does give you a real appreciation of home and family and security. But if we take the midpoint of your moon, which is close to Uranus in your 6th house, I do feel that you're someone who likes to have a degree of personal space, and that might be emphasised by that Aquarius ascendant. Aquarius people can often need a little bit of room to breathe. But if we look at the point between Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius, and the moon, they're quite close. They're about 9 degrees, about 8.5 degrees. So I think having that space at home, but also really treasuring your home, is probably a big part of your nature. I also think you're someone who could be a bit restless. You might find it hard to sit still, and you might find yourself rearranging the furniture to some degree, or at least trying to find unique ways to live your domestic world, having Uranus so close to the moon. But the midpoint between the moon in the sign of Cancer, which of course is where it's most happy, it's in dignity, and the sun at 26 degrees Taurus is actually at 25 degrees Gemini in the 5th house. So even though you might love your home, you may love a little bit of space, I think you have at times, particularly with Mars and Jupiter also in Gemini in the 5th house, I think you've been quite a playful person at times. But when it comes to your family stuff, with Neptune right on the 10th house, but also having Saturn right close there as well, it wouldn't surprise me if you've had an appreciation of art or being an artist, form and function. Obviously the functionality comes from Saturn, the form comes from the artistic energies of Neptune. Saturn is also exalted in the sign of Libra, where you have it, and they're both in the 9th house. But I also feel that your professional situation at times may have been quite heavy for you, might have been quite draining. And also when it comes to your father, I feel that your father may have been at times quite strict and let you know very clearly what the rules and regulations were, and at other times it's almost like a mystery, like he wasn't there. I don't know if that relates to your childhood. You also have Chiron in the 12th house, as Elisa does. So, as I've mentioned before, Chiron in the 12th is a very sensitive area, and it means you can be very compassionate. But there may have been times when people kind of used you a little bit to share their problems, but they're not always being so sensitive to your needs. And it can run all the way to feeling a little bit victimised or bullied, particularly when we're younger. Now, in terms of your solar return, you didn't say where you're living now, so I've just done it on Cape Town. And what comes up from this is that Mercury is in the 12th house, but just, and it is conjunct with the ascendant in the sign of Gemini, and also the midpoint for you is in Gemini. So I think this coming year for you is going to give you a need to be mentally stimulated, but at the same time you may find yourself evolving, exploring more healing strands, more spiritual strands. And there is one massive aspect that's going to dominate this year for you, and that is that the solar return for you does see the moon actually very, very close to where it was when you were born, but it's exactly opposite Pluto. So Pluto's in your 8th house and the moon's in your 2nd house. So I think all of this coming year, you may find that your emotional center point between, especially around values, self-worth, money, where you're most invested to others, I feel that there could be times when it's a little difficult to find the midpoint in the seesaw between your sensitivity and your power, which comes from Pluto being in Capricorn. You also have Saturn and Jupiter in the 8th house of this solar return. So marshalling your resources, or something to do with your resources, or a business matter, could be a big part of the journey of this year ahead. But I think there will be times when it's a bit difficult to keep a balance between the intensity of your emotions and the sensitivity of your emotions. But a wonderful Gemini energy again, so there's lots of opportunity to communicate with people, but I think you're going to be diving deep, exploring more about your subconscious. You may find yourself with an avid appreciation of reading crime novels this year, or it could be the occult just becomes ever more alluring to you. So I hope that gives you some insight into your year ahead. So where does that bring us up to then?
Well, I would like to have a little look at our mailbag.
Okay.
If that is okay.
Sure.
So this question is from Kamal. Hello, A-team. It's always a pleasure listening to you both. Thank you so much. Had a burning question. What does it mean when the upcoming eclipse on May the 26th falls right on someone's ascendant degree? Will it mean all will be well or otherwise? Thank you for giving the opportunity to ask this question.
Well, it's a great question. Thank you so much. So the ascendant is how we assimilate information. It's how people readily see us. It's our physical self. It's our body. So it's very, if you like, very Aryan. So it's very much about instant energy. So I think having the emotion there of the lunation is asking us to get in touch with the deeper side of the way that we relate to others. And of course, this particular lunation occurs in Sagittarius, which is very much about a higher truth. But it's also mutable, so it's quick moving, it's a bit impatient. So I think over the next 6 months, there is an opportunity to get a deeper understanding of how your ascendant is operating. But of course, it also means that the sun is pivoted right on the 7th house in terms of equal house system, not necessarily Placidus, of your of this particular event. So I would say that, balancing your individuality and understanding more how others view you, the 1st house, the 7th house where the sun is how you interact with others and your relationships. So I think it could be an interesting time over the next 6 months for learning more about what you need from a relationship, but also what someone else needs from you. So I think it can help you to understand more about your individuality, but also more about relationships. And someone, if this is relating to your particular chart, I think it's possible that a relationship is going to go through or come into your life in quite a profound way over the next half year.
Wow, thank you so much. Well, thank you for your questions. Thank you for the word of the week, and thank you for joining us here.
And also, thank you so much for our patrons. We have had a few issues with Patreon itself, so we apologise to Shannon in particular, who unfortunately has been on the end of that, and we're trying to understand why this has happened, but we're very grateful for any contributions. In terms of our personal situation, we're still engaged in the contracting of our new home, so therefore we don't want to say too much because we don't want to tempt fate.
We're packing at the moment.
We are packing, and we obviously will share any more news once we have a firm understanding of when everything may be able to fall into place. But for now, from the 18th, have a wonderful week commencing the 17th of May. What an action-packed week it is.
And from us both, it's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from her. Goodbye.